of this is just proving to him that he can do it. Because if he's nervous and he's like, I don't really want to, and we pick him up, then we never allow him the ability to actually figure out that he's capable of doing it on his own, right?
You can do it.
Come on, sir.
Come on, come on.
Come on.
Oh, good boy.
There you are. Come on, buddy. There we go.
I'm so nervous. Goodness.
Yeah. And that's something that, no, that's fine. I know, we're going this way, you'll be fine. All right, and that's kind of part of it is obviously you're here to learn some of the different ways to work him through that stuff, because what happens is when his fear inhibits us to be able to do things with him and take him out, then it just kind of makes it inadvertently worse, you know? Yeah. Because the older he gets, the more scary the world is if he's not able to kind of experience it and get exposed to it at a young age. Yeah. If you want to have a seat, I'll just kind of work with him on getting him used to some leash pressure here so he'll respond a little bit better to it. See if he's interested in any snacks. Good job, buddy. You wanted to eat a snack? Yeah. Very good. Very good. Come here, sir. Good job. There you go. Very, very nice. Hi. Good job. There you go. Yeah, good snacks, huh? Good snacks. There you go. It's right there. You looking around, huh? Good boy. Good job. Good job. Well, it depends on the breeding. Good job. Most of the time, a dog this age with this extensive of fear and stuff like that, it's likely a genetic thing. So in his bloodline somewhere, his mom, his dad, grandparents were kind of like this. Good job. Which doesn't mean that training won't help, but he'll likely have kind of a default setting of always just being a little bit nervous. There you go. Good job. But a big piece of that is going to be making sure that we're setting good standards for him and giving him the direction that he needs, because if we cater to him and kind of coddle to his nervousness and his fear, especially when it's unrealistic and it doesn't really make sense for the environment that he's in, then we're going to perpetuate it and we tend to make it worse. Good job. Yeah. So essentially, we want to be a good gauge for him and his perspective of what's actually scary and what isn't, right? So if he, in this environment, of course, nothing scary is happening. So he's freaking out and he's like, everything is scary, everything's nervous, I don't know what's going on. And if I were to say like, oh, it's okay, buddy, right? And I pick him up and I shelter him from that and I make him feel really, really safe, what I'm doing is I'm reinforcing to him that you need rescued because this world really is super scary, right? Whereas if I go about, of course in a gentle and understanding way, teaching him like, there's nothing going on, man. There's nothing that should be this scary that it's causing this type of reaction from you. That gives him better perspective. Good job. Kind of like when the toddler has a meltdown over the blue cup instead of the red cup. It's our job as parents to be like, I get you're upset, but it's really not that big of a deal, right? They're both cups, they both do the same thing. Doesn't matter that they're a different color. Good job. Do you want this? So my goal today is really just gonna be getting him a little bit more comfortable moving around the room, getting better with leash pressure. Good boy. Good job. Exactly. And start to expose him a little bit to the world and open up his horizons a little bit. Good job. So you can see now when he has those panic moments, he's learning that he needs to yield to the leash pressure and come back to me rather than do his backflips and his somersaults and all of that kind of stuff. Good boy, Roman. Good job. When you're dealing with multiple dogs in the house, there's a couple angles with this. So multiple dogs in the house and then also a puppy versus an adult dog. There's a couple things to keep in mind. And in my house, so I have 4 dogs total. And the way that I run that and manage that is I'm very, very careful with resources. So whether that's toys, food, even affection from me with my dogs, those are really big points of contention in the dog world, or they can be. So say he has a toy, we want to make sure that, sure, but then they do the trading thing, right? And they want each other's toys.
She's an aggressive chewer.
Sure.
So she destroys her toy and then she tries to bogart his toy too.
Exactly. And so then that becomes our job to stand in and advocate for him and say, Athens, you can't take his toy. And then also on the same accord, not let him go take toys from her either. So what I would do is just pick up any toys or bones when you're not able to watch, and then maybe in the evenings when you guys are all hanging out and resting and you want to give them a toy, give it to them and just watch. And if Athens tries to go over as she's on her way to him to take his toy, tell her no and correct her with her e-collar. And then with him, I would recommend just having him on a leash a lot in the house so that you have a little more control. And if he tries to go to Athens to take the toy, just grab his leash and, okay.
He's a very sensitive, very generous dog. It's really, Athens needs a little bit more, like she needs some touch-ups.
Good, very good. Well, and some of it too, we have to remember that if she's snarling or growling and things like that, that doesn't always mean that that's her, that she's doing anything wrong in that situation, because that's just how dogs communicate. So with my youngest dog, who was a puppy, with 3 of my adult dogs, there were plenty of times that they growled and snarled at him because he was being rude, right? And they're just teaching him. So they're showing him their boundaries of like, you can't just run over and grab my ear whenever you feel like it when we're resting, or you can't come over and climb on top of me, you know, things like that. And that stuff is really important for a puppy to learn from an adult dog. Good. Because that's how he learns social boundaries and everything like that. So really look at the situations of how they're interacting, and if she is getting snarly or growly because he's trying to interact with her in a way that she doesn't like, then that's okay, you know? That's his job then to back off and be like, okay, then I'll leave you alone at that point. Good, very nice, buddy. And so you see how he's a lot more comfortable now, right? And confident, we can start to see that. And I haven't done any like coddling or petting or hugging or carrying or anything. All of this confidence that he started to feel is just simply through me being very consistent and setting my standard of when I give you that leash pressure, I want you to respond to it. So he's getting more confident with me because he's like, okay, so this lady, she has a plan and she knows what that plan is and I have to follow that plan. Come here. You want to get up on this bed? Oh, come on. Let's do it. Come on. Oh, good job, bud. Very impressive. Mm-hmm. Good job. So this week when you're working with him, you're really not going to worry too much about like commands or sit or come or anything like that. We're just doing the very basics of getting him accustomed to the leash. Good boy. Okay, that's kind of like what I talked about when he was throwing a fit over there to come out of the doorway, is that anytime that he puts on the brakes and he's like, I can't do it, and we pick him up or we go back the other way or whatever it might be, we're just showing him that, like, you're right, you can't do it, right? Whereas here, I'm saying, but I know you can, buddy. I believe in you. And every time he does it successfully on his own, with, of course, a little bit of help and guidance from us, he's like, oh, I did do it on my own. And it just builds his confidence a little bit. Good boy. Okay. Of course, when we have a dog with as much nervousness as he does, we want to do that in small doses that are easy for him to be successful. Good boy. So like the first few times that you take him outside to essentially go on what would be a walk, I'd encourage you to stay just in your yard, you know what I mean? And work on this in your yard, work on it maybe in your driveway, maybe in front of your house on the sidewalk, just little bits at a time, you know? I would say your homework, and I'm going to have you do a little bit of walking in here just to see how he responds to you and everything, but your homework is basically going to be just working on the leash pressure this week. So you can do drills. I'd start in your house as like the simplest, easiest environment. You could even put Athens away if you wanted to, you know, while you initially do it the first few times. And I'd say at least once a day. If you want to do a second session, that's fine. But I'd keep them short and sweet, maybe 5 to 15 minutes at the most. And you're just going to work on walking around with him and getting him accustomed to staying close to you by using the leash pressure. And then once he's doing great in the house after the first few times, then you could take him out in the yard. Do it out in the yard, and then you could slowly expand his world little by little as you find that he's successful in that. And everything with him is going to feel very monotonous and repetitive, and that's typically how it goes, especially when we have dogs that need to build confidence, because you can see every time you're doing this, he's getting more and more confident with his execution of it. So be prepared for lots of repetition.
Now I would try to have just all of the lead in the left hand, because you can see immediately when we're allowing them to have the freedom, she immediately takes advantage of it. So then use that as that learning opportunity. Perfect. Give that correction and then repeat the calm, just like you did. Perfect. And then if you need to, if it seems like she just keeps going, then we can start adding a little bit more leash pressure right now. But for right now, I want to see, you know, because even right there, as I was telling you what my rule of thumb was, she was in front and then she immediately was like, she caught herself and fixed it, right? So it's like, that's ideally what we want, is her to not make any mistakes, but best case scenario, she does make the mistake and she kind of catches it before we have to give that correction, right? And this is another thing where I don't really mind if, you know, as long as Rosie's coming over here and still maintaining a good heel command, you know, I don't really mind that she's coming over. Sometimes the dogs just really like to be on that inside control. And so instead of fighting for it and constantly rotating in and out on the left side, one will sometimes just come over to the right side. That's totally fine, as long as they're still maintaining that criteria again with the come command, right? If she's coming over to the right side to come sniff this bush or to go look at that squirrel or whatever, then obviously, yeah, we're gonna give a correction for that. But in terms of walking, that's totally fine. How about the behavioral issues and stuff like that in the house? How have those been going?
So,
barking, jumping, all that stuff.
The jumping, Rosie's been great.
Yeah.
Now, like, if I leave in the morning and when she gets up, she doesn't put the collars on.
Oh, okay.
Right away.
Yeah.
Like, now they did tear, like, again, something like, you know, like, they found paper or something, something, and then. Yeah. They're tearing it up. Off the,
Okay. So, yeah. So, I mean, and it sounds like you already know the answer. What I would say to that, right, is just making sure that the e-collars are on so that we can address for it. And then obviously, you know, just being a little bit like self-aware of what's on that counter and everything like that. The reason I try to be so strict on it, we're going to keep going straight this way.
We are doing some remodeling, so there was just
Yeah, and that's, again, that's what I mean. Life happens, shit's gonna get out in the open and whatever, so it's like we can try to do our best, doesn't mean we're gonna be able to avoid everything. But being, again, prepared for those situations so that when you catch them, or when she catches them kind of like walking into the kitchen, she sees them tearing up the paper or something, she can tell them no, go find the remote, and then give that correction. Because remember, the correction doesn't have to immediately come after that no marker. Okay. As long as we're giving that no marker appropriately with a good timing, then the correction can come, 30 seconds or so after, right? Yeah. It's more, the timing of the no marker is more important. Just be careful, okay. The no marker is more important than the timing between the correction and the verbal, right? So that is something where it does buy you time, right? So that because it's understandable to not always have the remote in your hand 24/7, you can go and release them to go to the bathroom. So it's reasonable it's understandable to not have the remote in your hand 24/7. So again, that's why we rely so much on that verbal, because it's also something that eventually down the road, we're being consistent with it. They are on their, they're on their shit, and they know what they're doing. It's good to still have the remotes and the collars on, but when they know their stuff, very rarely we're actually going to have to correct them, right? So it's something that, down the road, we might even just be able to tell them no, and they just immediately fix themselves because it's just so routine that correction follows, So that's where we just need to be consistent about it now. This is just something, honestly, it just takes time. It's just knowing what appropriate level to be at, because, depending on the situation, the stimulation around you, it's going to differ. And even if you go to the same place, if we do the same walk next time, we might be at a completely different level, right? Just based on the distractions around. So it's something that it will always kind of change, and so you just kind of need to get used to, like, okay, on average, this is what level we're working at. And the only reason I tend to go up a little bit faster around these situations is because I would rather find a higher level that works more efficiently, where I'm correcting less and I'm getting you more kind of locked in faster, than being at a lower level and trying to be kind of like help you work through it and stuff and everything, yet I'm still correcting every 20 feet and so, and you're not getting it, Yeah. So, so that's something where I usually, like in this environment, if I see no reaction at all, we're gonna go right here. If I don't see any reaction, it doesn't seem like she really cares about the correction at all, then I'm just immediately gonna jump up. But if it's something where, okay, she's definitely reacting to it, but she's still, kind of all over the place, looking everywhere, super distracted and everything, then I can kind of stay at that level because I see that there's a reaction. We just need to kind of focus her in on what I'm actually asking her to do, right? It's great to hear that they're starting to kind of get that confidence back, start to go to the bathroom less in the house. I know that's a big one, but I'm just trying to think if there's, again, they seem to be going good. It's more just, now that we're doing these follow-ups, the purpose of the follow-ups is more of kind of like fine-tuning and tweaking and figuring out what we need to do a little bit different here and there to make sure that their success continues growing as well as your success keeps growing, right? I don't want to go too long without seeing you where you start getting a little bit more sloppy with the commands, and if you do have questions, or maybe you're doing the order of corrections wrong or order of a command wrong, right, that we're then confusing them more, right? So that's why we really like to do these follow-ups every once in a while. But it does sound like they're doing pretty good right now. So just the small things of just a little bit more duration if it does look a little bit sloppy and ending on that good note. I like to try to do 2 or 3 repetitions of really solid, good repetitions before I kind of end the session. And then working a little bit more on that distance of the duration as well. The bed stays are obviously your best, so that you can kind of push a little bit more with the duration, but I would recommend, just because it's starting to get nicer weather and we're gonna be probably more outside doing commands at the park and stuff like that, right? I wanna make sure that those downstays are in their mind too, so that when we are going outside and practicing them, It's not as confusing with all the distractions going around because they haven't worked a downstay inside where it was easier. You know, if we're forcing them to go right outside after they haven't done it in a few months, it's going to be a lot harder for them to kind of focus and do that, right? And again, our goal is to be correcting as little as possible. So that's how we're going to get there. The walk looked great too. You know, your timing of the correction, you know, I think we could maybe go up a little bit higher with Gabbana, but I know that Rosie is a little bit more sensitive than she is. So, you know, I want to try to be in the average of both of them, but you could see like Rosie didn't make a mistake that whole time. Yeah. Right? So it's something where in that situation, yes, I want to be average in case she does make a mistake, but because she's very rarely making mistakes and Gabbana's more the one that's doing it, I would probably weigh a little bit more heavy towards what means more to her, because she's clearly the one we need to fix more than Rosie, right? And then if for whatever reason, if Rosie does break the command or something, then we can change it down, and just as long as the timing of the no marker is good, we can go and change the levels to appropriate level for her and give that correction, you know.
How do you think after time, like, because obviously you could tell like the shaking and you know, where she's following Rich, but do you think that with time, like, she's gonna feel calmer, like, because obviously she's doing it right, she's not doing what she was doing before and freaking out and hiding and doing all that stuff. But with this, like, where you could tell that she still has that nervous, like. Yeah,
I think it's definitely something where the timing of her calming down will get a lot better and a lot faster. I can't say for certain that she won't ever feel anxious, you know what I mean? But but I think the time in which she's able to calm down and kind of realize, okay, I'm good, you know. But just because it's such a high level and everything and stuff, I think anywhere you go new, whether it's like at the park or a patio for dinner or whatever, a friend's house, whatever it may be, any new environment, high stimulated environment, you're gonna see this at least for a little bit. But obviously the more you can use it and the more you can get her around these situations, louder distractions and higher stimulated situations, it's gonna be something that with that repetition, again, she's going to be able to calm down a lot faster. So the time of her being calmed down will go down. But then you can see Gabbana's ready to take a nap. She's like, you need to chill out, sister. She runs it. So yeah, I think it's just something where she's, you know, you can see she's still kind of like looking around and kind of keeping an ear open for everything. So it's still kind of heightened up, right? I'm sure once you get her in the car, once you guys get home, she's gonna pass right out, you know? Because it is kind of exhausting to be this anxious and scared, you know, so nervous. So once she's in that calm setting and being able to relax, you'll see that she'll probably fall asleep right away.
Like, she's there, she loves it. She's not.
And this is something,
like when she's in there.
Right. And this is something where, you know, I relate it to more so the fact of like, it's them kind of addressing that issue of the anxiety, you know, of feeling anxious or nervous or scared, whatever it may be. Or for some dogs, you know, excitement and everything, where it's just like, they're trying to hold it in, but they just like can't. So they're just kind of like shaking and stuff. So, you know, ultimately what I'm looking for again is this, is like, okay, now she's starting to kind of like calm down. Now it's getting like, she stops and then she shakes and then she stops and then she shakes, right? Yeah. So you can already see she's starting to kind of like calm down. She's not panting as much. Yeah. And, you know, so again, that's why the duration is so important, where it's just like, if you have guests over or you do bring her somewhere else where you know she's going to be nervous, you know she knows her shit. So get her in that command, get her comfortable, get her away from as much stimulation as you can, you know, get her in a comfortable situation. Don't have her down in the middle of the room where like people are gonna be walking by and stuff like that, right?
Like at work, I've actually brought her up there, which is, you know, so before, if she came up and was in my office, people walk in and she freaked out, like, cause she was scared. And she's backing again, it's backing, it's not, I'm coming at you.
Right,
like, oh my God, where am I gonna go? But
Mom.
She has, if she's been up a couple times and she's, you know, she stayed close to me, but then I'll actually allow him to come pet her and whatnot. Like, where she's like, okay, no one's coming to attack me.
And that's what I want, right? Now, the biggest thing with that, I would say, is allowing kind of her with a dog that is anxious like that, right? Right now, she's choosing the right thing of like if she is scared to try to leave instead of put on this mean face and try to attack, right? But I would recommend, you know, if you are having people come in and hang in the office and do whatever, allow her to make the first move. Okay, perfect.
She's coming, like, because she'll see, or like, I have them both of them, right? So, obviously, Gabbana, it's like, hey, let's get petted. So you came in here and...
Yep. Obviously came in here for me, so yeah.
Because obviously it's Gabbana. And then, so, like, she'll be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, and so that's perfect. So if that's the case, we get, you know, it's so routine for some people to be like, yeah, my dog's nervous, but like once you come and say hi to them, then they're fine. But what really happens is like, obviously she's scared, she's trying to back up, and then what she sees is this person coming in with, she doesn't know their intentions, but she just sees this person coming in to give them attention, and then that's when you get nipped, because it's like, I tried backing up and you continue to come into my personal space, so my fight or flight, I have to fight, so now I'm gonna nip you, right? So, but as long as she's kind of making that first move and, you know, they're coming in for you, so if it's something, right, like, so it's something where it's bonus,
She's like, okay.
And that's also how you're gonna build her confidence too, is it's something where she knows, okay, these people aren't coming in and immediately going to come into my face, right? If I want affection, you know, Gabbana's getting all that affection that she wants, that's fine, right? If I want that, I can go over and I know I can get it because I'm safe, this is a safe environment. But if I feel too nervous, I don't have to worry about this person coming into my personal space either, right? So that's just a really big important thing with that as well. But that's good that it's been going well so far.
So what's new?
So, you know, definitely worked on doing the charges and just every, you know, couple of days making sure I just do a little charge session.
Sure.
Getting used to that, and then just really paid attention to the pillars in terms of when working on stuff they definitely know and when working on new stuff.
Cool.
And just kind of recognizing why I'm doing certain things and why that's effective versus why something might not be as effective.
Sure.
And then just in terms of like walking and stuff, very reactive on the walks. And then it's like anytime someone like knocks on the door, it's like he just goes insane, and it's like he knows his bed. But without the e-collar, like to have a way, he knows immediately that once he gets off that we can't get him back on. And then the thing is so like we had somebody come into the house, so I thought, oh, maybe I could leash on so that I could create that leash pressure for the bed. And switch up the form. But then when he's on the leash in the house, he goes absolutely insane because he...
Well, so this is where you get in. So there's two things to talk about here. We have obviously the situational thing, which is just, you know, again, plans for the specific behavioral issues, and then you have the overarching, like, understanding the stuff and how we're going to be working through this stuff, right? So when we get into so understanding the quadrants is important, right? So let's take negative reinforcement. You said you put the leash on to implement some negative reinforcement to enforce the bed, right? Now this is where you get into, let me figure out how to phrase this here. This is where you get into understanding negative reinforcement is two parts, right? So part one is your understanding of the pressure and release, right? So the concept of like, all right, cool, we put the leash on, he steps off the bed, we apply pressure, he gets back on the bed, pressure comes off. But then you have the motivation side of things of, in order for negative reinforcement to work, the dog has to be motivated by the negative reinforcement that we're providing. Does that make sense, right? So under moderate circumstances where there's not a ton of distractions and stuff like that, the dog may be motivated enough by negative reinforcement in the form of leash pressure on a plastic pinch collar enough to comply with it in that setting. But in the heat of somebody actually coming in, the motivation of that pressure on the leash, it's meaningless to him, right? So even though your timing is perfect, because the motivation isn't there, it's still not gonna work. You know what I mean? That's why I talk a lot about when we're training and we're using our individual quadrants, we have to make sure that two ends of the spectrum are appropriate, meaning clarity and motivation. And when I talk about clarity, what I mean is our timing good, right? Are we releasing the pressure in the same spot? Are we giving the reward at the correct moment? Are we giving the correction at the correct moment, et cetera, right? Are we being consistent enough about providing it? All of those details of like the handler side of things, right? From there, the motivation has to be there, right? Dog has to care enough about the pressure provided or the consequence provided or the reward provided in order to be compliant. And neither works without the other, right? So we could have perfect clarity, like I'm sure your timing was good with your leash pressure, but because the motivation wasn't there, he wasn't compliant with it. And on the contrary, we could have really high motivation. We could have an e-collar all the way up and using continuous pressure and stuff like that. But if our timing isn't good, if our clarity isn't there, that's going to be meaningless to the dog as well, right? So that's where the art of blending the two together. And you start to realize then we have to understand the quadrant we're using, but we have to understand how do we apply that quadrant in a way that the dog cares enough about, right? What type of negative reinforcement is going to be appropriate, right? What type of reward is going to be appropriate? What type of punishment is going to be appropriate, et cetera, right? So no big deal. I mean, that's obviously kind of the next progression of what we would be working on anyways. So, okay, cool. So let's do this. We're going to focus a little bit on negative reinforcement specifically today. I think that's going to be a good one to kind of dive into a bit. One thing that I think is really nice when you're learning how to use individual components or tools or anything like that is to learn how to use them independently from each other, right? Obviously, you know, if we were training a dog really well, right, and doing it in the proper way and all those types of things, we would blend all of this together, right? We would use positive reinforcement in addition to our negative reinforcement. We would know where to kind of shift back and forth between them so that we're making sure we're kind of keeping the dog as motivated as possible through the process. But I think that understanding independently the use of negative reinforcement is beneficial, so you can learn the timing as far as the clarity side of things, and then in addition to that, learn how to gauge motivation, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with him simply trying to teach this bed command with the e-collar, right? And we're gonna be using solely negative reinforcement for this, which is going to be the pressure on, pressure off. So what I'm gonna do here is I just wanna make sure that I can get him onto the bed here. There we go. So I'm just gonna use that negative reinforcement using the leash pressure a couple times, okay, to make sure that I can get him into position. Pretty good. Okay, I'll do one more. Okay. So obviously I can physically get him onto the position, so that's the thing with the e-collar. The e-collar doesn't have any sort of directional component to it, obviously. It doesn't say move this way, move this way, move this way. So you're almost always, when you're using negative reinforcement with your e-collar, gonna be conditioning it in conjunction with the leash to give that direction to it. So I'm gonna be starting super low. We'll be at a 2 right now, just for the sake of learning the timing and getting him acclimated to that sensation a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna walk up to the bed here, and then before I apply any pressure, I'm gonna make sure he's not getting onto the bed first. I'm gonna engage e-collar, help him on, and then the second forepaws get on, I'm gonna release that pressure, right? Okay, and I'm gonna do that a couple of times here. So e-collar on, releasing when he gets forepaws on. Okay, and there's no verbal command or anything, because if you remember a rule from last time, we're not naming something until we could very, very smoothly get the dog to do it. And usually I just ride with it at a low level for a while, right? I'm making sure the clarity is there. I'm giving him enough time to feel that sensation in conjunction with this position, and to confirm that I've done enough repetitions where he's clearly not listening to the sensation, not because he's confused by it, but because he's not motivated by it before I start increasing, okay? So I do a lot of repetitions at a low level. Good, and that's what I wanna start to see, is that he's starting to predict that sensation and do it on his own, okay? Now another common thing we talked about last time was the concept of overshadowing, right? So if you notice, as I'm using these different types of pressure, I'm always doing e-collar pressure, then leash pressure, right? And the reason for that is because I need to be able to see when he's responding to the e-collar pressure over the leash pressure, right? Okay. That's what starts to condition into him that this means the same thing as this, right? No different than we would condition in a mark, right? This mark means this. So our gauge here that we're using is he starting to figure it out, right? Because if our negative reinforcement clarity is good and he's motivated enough by the sensation, realistically after enough repetitions, he should start to figure out what it is we want, which he is, which tells me that my clarity is good. And for right now, the 2 is motivating enough for this amount of distraction, right? Very good. Now, typically speaking, right, if I were training this dog in a session or something, I would start adding some rewards in at this point. But as you're learning how to do this, here's the potential issue you could run into by adding rewards in the learning stages. Let's say the clarity is good, but the motivation isn't. He doesn't care about the sensation. I could do this 15 times, and if I'm rewarding him every time he does it, at some point the positive reinforcement is gonna kick in over the negative reinforcement, and he'll be learning it, but not because we had good negative reinforcement. Does that make sense?
And that clears up a lot of...
Yes.
I was immediately bringing in positive thinking.
And listen, it's fine, it's not a problem, right? Like if I could lean into positive reinforcement, that's fantastic, but for the sake of understanding how to use negative reinforcement, right, we have to learn how to use it independently without that kind of fog. Very good. And again, you see how we're using this to teach a behavior, right? It's a reinforcement, meaning the more we use it, the more it's telling him bed is good. Being on bed is good, which is why he's choosing to go to it on his own. Clarity is still good. Your timing is excellent, but you can tell he's not as motivated by the sensation at this point. And that's normal. A lot of times you can get away with a low level initially because it's so new to the dog, right? But then as they realize, I mean, a 2 is literally like nothing, right? As they realize that that 2 is just, it's just there, they stop caring about it so much. So we're gonna start gradually increasing here. Let's go to about a 4 and then do the same process. And then every time I make an increase like that, I usually try to do a handful of repetitions before I increase again. So we'll do maybe 4 more reps, see how he does. If it still seems like he's still pretty distracted by stuff, we'll increase again. Nice. Let's see if we get one more good one. Okay. That's pretty darn good. All right, go ahead and release him off.
Okay.
Okay, so now we move to the next step, just like we did last time, which is we have a behavior now solidified. We could fairly easily get him into it. In most cases, he's doing it on his own. So we can begin to name this now, right? No. So you're gonna do the same exact process now, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna walk up to the bed, and when you stop, you're gonna say bed. So we're conditioning in our cue, right? We're saying bed, waiting a couple seconds. If he doesn't do it, we're using our negative reinforcement to then get him onto the bed. Our new sensation that we're trying to condition is the verbal. So that would come first in the sequence, then it would go back in line of what it was before, which is then e-collar, then leash if we need it.
Bed.
Excellent. And that is literally how you teach a command with negative reinforcement. You know what I mean? Like that's the process, that's how it works. And the only variable would be if he was more distracted, as long as your timing was good, the motivation would just need to continue to go up to meet it, right? That's the only difference. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep using the negative reinforcement to teach all this, but we're gonna start adding the stay into this. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take him up, right? You're gonna give your bed command. If he does it, great. If he doesn't, you're using your negative reinforcement with the e-collar to enforce it. Then you're gonna start walking around holding the leash. And if he steps off, we're just engaging e-collar, getting him back on. We're not repeating any commands or anything. Okay. Perfect. Very good. Awesome. Okay, so what we're gonna do next here is you're gonna get him on the bed and you're gonna drop your leash and walk away. Same deal, if at any point he steps off, you're engaging e-collar, then going right back and getting him back onto that bed.
Bed.
Pretty good. Why don't you do one more of those? Now, obviously, he's doing really well with it right now, so some of the additional distractions stuff are fine, but let's say this were a new dog, this is a client's dog, something like that. Don't get super wild with the distractions initially. Yeah.
I was just hoping for an experience to try it. Just
sure.
He is used to his bed, but...
So if you've ever heard, right, I don't remember, they probably talked about this in the Michael Ellis DVD, the 3 Ds that we work through, right? So distance, duration, distractions, right? You really only want to emphasize one of those at a time. So if we looked at what we're doing right now, so by adding and dropping the leash, technically what we're doing is we're adding distance. So I wouldn't necessarily add distance plus a distraction at the same time. I would proof that distance, I would get that rock solid, then once the distance was good, I would move on to the distraction then at that point, right? Distraction being out of sight, gestures, quick movements, things like that. Awesome. Seems like a pretty smart cookie. Very good. Okay, last thing I want to see you do is we're going to now generalize everything we just did on this bed to this bed. So that means we need to start from piece number 1 again, which is going to be no verbal command, just the negative reinforcement conditioning in this bed. Then we would move on to verbal command. Then we would move on to duration holding the leash. Then we would move on to distance dropping the leash. Too shabby. All right, last thing I want to see you do here is we're going to start adding the positive reinforcement back into this also. So you're going to do everything exactly how you did, but when he does it correctly, you could add in your yes terminal marker into it to release him off.
Okay, so yes to get him over.
Yep.
So am I doing it directly when his 4 feet hit?
It's up to you. Right now, so we got to ask ourselves, what's the expectation? Since our expectation up until this point has been the duration on position, we'll add it at the end. So once you're done with your duration, because we're technically marking and rewarding for that. Looks good. I mean, he picked all this up very well. Now, he's a really good dog to learn a lot of this stuff with for 2 reasons. 1, he's got great motivation. 2, given the fact that he's such a short-haired dog, you don't run any risk of contact issues with your e-collar, right? You know he's feeling it, right? Because it's always, they have such thin fur, obviously. Where this gets tricky sometimes is when you're working with some really thick-coated dogs and stuff. Might be a little inconsistent with it, because that will affect your clarity. You know what I mean? If it's hitting in and out, in and out, in and out, the on-off of it is not going to be as clear to the dog. Right. So that's where you get into certain dogs. They have like different types of contact points and stuff like that to help combat that. But that's where things start to get more challenging, is as you're working with some dogs that are much harder to visually see how they're feeling the sensation. But yeah, that looks awesome. He did really good. with all that. That was, like I said, crash course into negative reinforcement. Answer some of the questions as far as your negative reinforcement you were using with the leash and why it wasn't working. Your timing was good, motivation you didn't care about, obviously, right? So things that I would work on right now, I would continue conditioning in your e-collar just with your bed command. Obviously the process is the same with any command, but you really, with negative reinforcement, want to be careful and that you're doing it with one thing really clearly at a time, right? And then once that thing is like rock solid, then you can move on to the next thing. You know what I mean? So emphasize that bed, because that's going to help you with your issues you're having anyways, because we need to get him to a place where he's holding bed stays reliably when people are coming over, you know? That's going to help get him past this kind of stuff. And what I would do is I would work through all your stages like we did till he gets to a place where with no distractions in the house, he will hold the bed stay just as good as he was doing just now. Then I would start adding the distraction side of things in, which would be bed stay, have somebody ring the doorbell, negative reinforcement to get him back on if you need to, and then start playing around with your level a little bit, right? Until it's motivating enough where he'll hold it while doorbell's ringing. Then we need to make sure he'll hold it while somebody's walking in the front door, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I will say, I definitely will go through that whole process every time, but just in doing, I kind of, it was the thing that I was like, yeah, I'll hold him to the same kind of standard, even though I can't give him the reinforcement. But so he does a bed stay for an hour a day with him. Before, he hears something, he's off immediately. Now, at least he doesn't get off. He just starts barking, but doesn't get off when it does a minor distraction.
So we need to then push those distractions even more, right? To the point where he starts making those mistakes so he can learn from it. Because it sounds like really the big distraction is people coming in right now, right? So we need to get him holding it really well. And I'm not even worried if he's barking on it or anything. I just need him to hold it perfectly, right? So that is like your target goal with this, is get him holding it perfectly. And then from there, again, we could talk a little bit about then you get into the behavioral modification side of once he's holding it perfectly, how do we shift the association of people coming over? That's kind of the next progression then we would work into. But you've got to get to a place where he holds that bed stay literally perfectly while guests are coming over.